It was a chilly, silent night, and the village was shrouded in darkness, except for the dim lights glowing from the scattered houses. Inside one of these houses, Nneka stood by the window, her eyes fixed on the path that led to the other side of the house. Her heart raced as she spotted the familiar figure of her husband, Chima, walking toward the first wife's quarters. He disappeared into the darkness, and she let out a long sigh. Her mind was flooded with emotions she could no longer contain. Nneka had lived as Chima's second wife for years, and while she knew this was a reality she had accepted, the jealousy that had slowly built inside her now threatened to destroy everything. Tonight, as she stood in the shadows, she made a decision that would alter her family life. Nneka could no longer stand being pushed aside, her feelings ignored, and her presence unnoticed. It was time for her to take control, no matter the cost. Nneka's life had not always been this way. She had once been the radiant woman everyone adored, a woman full of laughter, joy, and compassion. Her marriage to Chima had been a dream come true. She was deeply in love and believed that even though she was his second wife, there would be space in his heart for her. But with time, things began to change. Chima spent more time with Adamma, his first wife. He admired her, showered her with affection, and relied on her for decisions that affected the household. Nneka felt her position slipping away. Every day, she watched Adamma effortlessly charm the villagers and their husband, and each day, Nneka grew more resentful. The whispers in her mind turned into loud thoughts she could not ignore. Why did Adamma get all the attention? Why did everyone love her? Slowly, bitterness consumed her. Adamma was not to blame, at least not entirely. From the moment Nneka joined the household, Adamma had treated her with kindness. She had welcomed Nneka with open arms and tried to share the responsibilities of the house fairly. She never flaunted her status as the first wife and even went out of her way to make Nneka feel comfortable. But Nneka did not want kindness, she wanted equality, or more so, superiority. No matter how much Adamma tried, it seemed nothing was enough. Adamma's efforts only made Nneka feel worse, as they reminded her of how much she lacked. Where Adamma was loved, Nneka was tolerated. Where Adamma was praised, Nneka was ignored. The weight of these unspoken truths crushed Nneka, and she stopped trying to find peace. Instead, she nurtured her jealousy, feeding it with every glance, every smile, and every act of affection that Chima gave to Adamma. Soon, the jealousy grew into something darker, something dangerous. On this particular night, Nneka watched Chima disappear into Adamma's room, and something inside her snapped. She had tolerated enough. She had swallowed her pride for too long, and now she was ready to act. Over the past few weeks, she had visited the village herbalist in secret, seeking a solution. The herbalist had given her a powder, a mixture of herbs and roots that could make someone ill. It wasn't deadly, the herbalist had assured her, but it would make Adamma weak. Weak enough that she would no longer be the center of Chima's world. Weak enough that Chima would finally notice Nneka, rely on her, and turn to her for comfort. The plan seemed foolproof, and Nneka's heart raced with anticipation. Tomorrow would be the day that everything will change. Tomorrow, Adamma would fall, and Nneka would rise. The next morning, Nneka went about her daily routine with a renewed sense of purpose. She prepared breakfast as usual, but this time, she slipped the herbal powder into Adamma's meal. Her hands trembled slightly as she mixed it in, but she reassured herself that this was necessary. Adamma had lived in the spotlight for too long, and it was time for Nneka to take her rightful place. As Adamma ate her meal, Nneka watched her closely, waiting for the first signs of the herbs taking effect. By mid-afternoon, Adamma began to feel lightheaded. She sat down to rest, assuming it was just the exhaustion from her duties. But as the day wore on, the dizziness turned into weakness, and by evening, Adamma could barely stand. Chima, who had been working outside, rushed to her side when he saw her struggling. "Adamma, are you okay?" he asked, his voice filled with concern. Nneka watched from the corner, pretending to be worried, but inside she smiled. Her plan was working. As the days passed, Adamma's condition worsened. She grew weaker and weaker, and the once lively and strong woman became a shadow of herself. The villagers began to talk, whispering about what could have caused such a sudden illness. Some believed it was the wrath of the gods, while others suspected foul play. But no one had any proof. and Nneka kept her secret well hidden. Chima, distraught and desperate to help his wife, spent every moment by Adamma's side. He called healers from neighboring villages, tried remedies, and prayed for her recovery. Nneka had expected that Chima would turn to her during this time, seeking comfort and support, but instead, he grew distant. He barely spoke to Nneka, his mind consumed by worry for Adamma. The attention Nneka had hoped to gain slipped further out of reach, and she realized that her plan was not going as she had expected. Instead of bringing Chima closer, Adamma's illness only deepened his love for her. Nneka watched with frustration and growing fear as Chima's devotion to Adamma intensified. He was always at her side, holding her hand, whispering words of encouragement, and doing everything in his power to make her feel loved. Nneka's heart twisted in jealousy and regret. This was not how it was supposed to be. She had thought that by making Adamma weak, she would become the new center of Chima's world. But instead, she was more alone than ever. The jealousy that had once fueled her actions now consumed her with guilt, and for the first time, Nneka began to question whether she had made a terrible mistake. Nneka could no longer bear the weight of her guilt. The burden of what she had done pressed heavily on her, and each day she felt more trapped. What if Adamma didn't recover? What if Chima discovered the truth? Nneka's mind raced with possibilities, and she became paranoid, constantly looking over her shoulder, fearing that someone would expose her secret. Desperation drove her back to the village herbalist, hoping for a solution. This time, she wanted something to reverse the damage she had done. But when she explained her situation to the herbalist, the old woman shook her head. "Once the herbs are in her system, there is no undoing it," she said coldly. Nneka's heart sank. She had not expected this. Nneka was at a loss. There was no way to reverse the effects of the herbs she had given Adamma, and this realization crushed her. She returned home feeling more hopeless than ever. The thought of Adamma never recovering terrified her. Nneka began to regret everything she had done, her jealousy, her plotting, and the bitterness she had allowed to fester in her heart. But it was too late now. The damage was done, and she would have to live with the consequences. Nneka's mind raced with possibilities. What if Adamma died? What would happen to her then? The guilt that weighed heavily on her heart threatened to consume her. She had wanted Chima's love, but now all she had was fear. Days turned into weeks, and Adamma's condition showed no signs of improving. Chima had grown pale from worry and exhaustion. He barely ate, and the vibrant man he had once been was now a shell of himself. His entire life revolved around Adamma's care, and Nneka felt more invisible than ever. She had expected to rise to prominence in Adamma's absence, but instead she was more alone than she had ever been. The servants in the household no longer smiled at her, and the villagers whispered whenever she passed by. Though no one knew the truth, Nneka's actions had begun to isolate her from the very life she had tried to seize control of. Her plan had failed in the most tragic way, and there was no undoing it. One fateful evening, Chima sat beside Adamma's bed, his eyes filled with sorrow. "Please, Adamma," he whispered, "don't leave me." He held her hand tightly, his fingers trembling. Adamma, who had been in and out of consciousness for days, opened her eyes weakly and looked at her husband. She tried to speak, but her voice was barely audible. "Chima," she whispered. Tears filled Chima's eyes as he leaned closer to hear her. "I love you," she said faintly. Her words broke his heart. And for the first time, Chima allowed himself to cry openly. Nneka stood outside the door, her heart aching at the sight. This was not what she had wanted. She had never imagined it would come to this. As Nneka watched the scene unfold, a deep sense of shame washed over her. She had caused this. She had let her jealousy drive her to actions she could never take back. And now, Chima and Adamma were suffering because of her. Nneka's heart pounded as the weight of her guilt became unbearable. She knew she had to confess. There was no other way to live with herself. But the fear of losing everything held her back. If Chima knew what she had done, he would never forgive her. The villagers would cast her out, and she would be left with nothing. Yet, the longer she remained silent, the more her guilt consumed her. Every day was a battle within herself. Confess and face the consequences, or keep silent and live in torment. One morning, after another sleepless night, Nneka made up her mind. She couldn't bear the burden of her secret any longer. It was eating her alive, and she had to let it go, no matter the cost. She walked slowly to Adamma's room, her hands trembling as she knocked on the door. Chima, who was sitting beside Adamma as usual, looked up, surprised to see Nneka. "Can I speak to you?" Nneka asked softly. Chima nodded, his face weary from days of worry. They stepped outside, and Nneka took a deep breath. This was it. She was about to reveal the darkest secret of her life. "Chima," she began, her voice shaking, "there's something I need to tell you. Something I should have told you a long time ago." Chima's brow furrowed with confusion. "What is it, Nneka?" he asked, his tone serious. Nneka struggled to find the words. How could she possibly explain what she had done? But there was no turning back now. I'm the reason Adamma is sick," she confessed, her voice barely above a whisper. Chima's eyes widened in shock, and for a moment he said nothing. "What?" he asked, his voice trembling with disbelief. "What are you saying?" Nneka's heart pounded in her chest. "I went to a herbalist," she admitted, tears streaming down her face. "I wanted to make her weak so that you would notice me, but I didn't know it would go this far. I didn't mean for it to happen like this." Chima stood frozen, his mind reeling from what he had just heard. Nneka's words echoed in his ears, and he struggled to comprehend the enormity of her confession. The woman he had trusted, the woman he had married, had caused Adamma suffering. His heart shattered into 1,000 pieces as anger, betrayal, and grief overwhelmed him. "How could you?" he finally whispered, his voice hoarse with emotion. "How could you do this to her? To us?" Nneka sobbed uncontrollably, her knees buckling as she collapsed to the ground. "I'm sorry," she cried. "I'm so sorry. I didn't mean for this to happen. Please, Chima, forgive me." But Chima couldn't bring himself to speak. He turned away from Nneka, unable to even look at her. The thought of what Adamma had been enduring because of Nneka's jealousy made him sick. Meanwhile, Nneka lay on the ground, sobbing uncontrollably. Her confession had been the hardest thing she had ever done, but now that it was out in the open, the weight of her guilt seemed even heavier. She had thought that telling Chima the truth would bring her some relief, but instead, it had only deepened her shame. The look in his eyes, the disgust, the pain, it was unbearable. Nneka had never felt so lost. She had always believed that love could fix anything, but now she realized how wrong she had been. Love built on lies and deceit was no love at all. Inside the house, Adamma stirred slightly in her bed, unaware of the storm brewing outside her door. Her body was still weak, but she could sense something was wrong. She tried to call out for Chima, but her voice failed her. All she wanted was for things to go back to the way they were, before the illness, before the sadness. But deep down, she knew that things would never be the same again. Life had changed, and no matter how hard she tried, she could never reclaim what was lost. Chima, torn between his love for Adamma and the betrayal he felt toward Nneka, stood outside the house for a long time, staring into the distance. The sun was beginning to rise, casting a soft glow over the village, but to Chima, it felt like the darkest day of his life. He had to make a choice, and he knew it wouldn't be easy. Nneka had confessed, but could he ever forgive her? Could he ever trust her again? And what about Adamma? Would she recover? Could he protect her from the pain that Nneka had caused? The villagers soon caught wind of the news, as whispers of Nneka's confession spread like wildfire. Everyone had an opinion, and many couldn't believe that someone so close to Chima had betrayed him in such a terrible way. Nneka became the subject of gossip, her name spoken with disdain and anger. People who had once been her friends now avoided her, and her life began to crumble. She had no one to turn to, and the isolation was unbearable. Nneka realized that in trying to win Chima's love, she had lost everything. As the days went on, Adamma's condition slowly began to improve, thanks to a new herbal remedy suggested by an elder in the village. Though her body was still weak, her spirit remained strong. Chima spent every moment by her side, his heart breaking with the guilt that he hadn't been able to protect her from Nneka's jealousy. But despite everything, Adamma's love for Chima never wavered. She forgave him for not seeing the truth sooner, understanding that love sometimes blinded people to the darkness in others. Nneka, on the other hand, could find no peace. She wandered through the village, her head hung low, as she tried to come to terms with what she had done. She had believed that love was the answer, But now she knew that love built on envy and deceit could never last. The love she had craved from Chima was hollow because it had never been hers to begin with. She had chased after something that was never meant for her, and in doing so, she had destroyed her own happiness. In the weeks that followed, Chima made a difficult decision. Though he couldn't forget what Nneka had done, he knew that holding on to anger and resentment would only harm him in the end. So he chose to forgive her, not for her sake, but for his own. He wanted to move forward with Adamma, to build a life of love and peace, and holding on to the past wouldn't allow that to happen. He called Nneka to meet him one final time, and with a heavy heart, he told her that while he forgave her, their relationship could never be the same. Nneka, though devastated, understood. She had caused too much pain, and she knew she couldn't undo the damage she had done. But hearing Chima's forgiveness gave her a sliver of hope. Perhaps, one day, she could forgive herself. She left the village, seeking a new life elsewhere, far from the memories of her mistakes. Though the road ahead was uncertain, Nneka knew that the only way to find peace was to let go of the past and start anew. As for Chima and Adamma, they began to rebuild their lives together. The scars of the past would always remain, but their love had survived the storm. They had faced the worst together, and now they were ready to embrace a future filled with hope, healing, and most importantly, love. Thanks for watching. If you're enjoying our story and want to be the first to catch more thrilling content, don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. We have amazing new videos coming your way that you won't want to miss. Hit the bell icon to get notified as soon as they drop. Join our growing community and stay tuned for fresh, engaging contents. Subscribe now and let's keep the excitement going.